This episode of Simulation Nation is brought to you by Avtrach Incorporated, your one-stop shop for everything wearable simulator and standardized patient.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Simulation Nation. Today, we are talking to Vinciya. She was at Johns Hopkins, and she did a study on the Avtrach. It was a multi-institutional randomized controlled trial to study stress levels with students and experienced nurses comparing the tracheostomy with a sterilized patient and a mannequin, and basically seeing how that translated from simulation to the bedside. So we're really excited to hear what her thoughts are, basically what her process was through this entire experience. And I can tell you by the end of it, I was exhausted hearing about all of the work that goes into such a...
You're giving them away the answers before they've even listened.
It was really easy, guys. As you can tell, this was a really easy process for her and probably didn't take much time at all.
Yeah, it took a long time. And the other thing is Maria Calandria from the VA hospital in Durham was the other site. And so the beauty in this is that it was both an academic as well as a hospital setting. Johns Hopkins obviously is both, but then also the VA hospital in Durham.
Yep.
And then what we found out was that there was not just nursing involved in this, but also speech language pathology and respiratory therapy. Mm-hmm. And I think the idea behind this is, you know, healthcare, it takes a team.
Yeah.
And that really, again, was one. It's really poignant to me to think about the fact that the work was done with this. They actually studied the salivary cortisol levels and looked at it at multiple different levels. Control group with the mannequins, the learning group with the wearable simulator and an SP was the experimental group. But really exciting information, and hopefully will be able to be broadly adopted as far as all of our wearable simulators. But we were really excited that she was able to complete the study, and it is now published and out for news, and she's going to join us today.
And she's going to also offer a few ideas for some other research concepts or projects that need to be focused on. And I thought that was also really interesting to hear her thoughts. So listen to what Vinciya has to say about the research. And again, it was really interesting to talk to her. Hi, everyone. We are so excited to have you on today, and we are so excited to talk to Vinciya Pandian more about her research and her work with the Global Tracheostomy Summit. Is it Collaborative? Okay, so we are going to learn more about that. So, Vinciya, can you just introduce us to some of your work and what's gotten you excited about the tracheostomy research?
Sure. Thank you for this opportunity. It's definitely a privilege to be on this podcast with all of you. I've had the privilege of being introduced to Global Tracheostomy Collaborative in 2014 by Dr. Alexander Hillel, one of the otolaryngologists at Johns Hopkins Hospital. Our team had an amazing opportunity to attend the Global Tracheostomy Collaborative, or we call it GTC, its kickoff meeting in London in 2014, where Stephen Hawkins was the keynote speaker. So, so since then, I've been serving in various capacities within the organization as a education committee member, eventually the chair, the treasurer, and currently the president of this organization. Throughout this whole time, I've had the opportunity to network globally with international experts and focusing on improving tracheostomy care through data, education, and partnership with individuals who have a tracheostomy, their family members and caregivers. This organization has given that platform to bring experts in this unique or specific health-related issue, because often people tend to focus on broader problems like cancer or diabetes, and it's very rare that people even know what a tracheostomy is. And so it's been a wonderful opportunity to find like-minded people and collaborate with them. This organization actually gives free membership for healthcare professionals and patients and family members. But for hospital membership, it's fee-based mainly because we have a tracheostomy registry that has data focused on tracheostomy that doesn't exist anywhere else. You have like large data sets like national inpatient sample and market scan. You'll see only certain outcomes in those, but in this one, it has everything pertaining to from the time you get the tracheostomy until you go out into the community. So it's definitely a wonderful one. But what I'm really impressed by this organization is the ability to partner with individuals with tracheostomy and their family members. When we do our international trach symposiums, we have a specific track just for those who have that lived experience. And I always find that track to be the most attended because we're learning from their lived experience more than all the healthcare knowledge that we have. And so to that end, our next event is actually coming up on October 23rd and 24th at the University of Chicago. So I would welcome everyone who's listening to this podcast to attend. So as I mentioned, my journey really began at Johns Hopkins Hospital, where I worked as a tracheostomy nurse practitioner for a decade before transitioning to academia. My role focused or centered on simulation-based education, where I was training folks across the hospital on how to improve the quality of care for tracheostomy, did a lot of QI projects, and really worked together as an interprofessional team to care for these individuals with complex airway needs over the last 2 decades. When I transitioned to academia, I was able to take some of those skills and really strengthen in that space. And so I became the Assistant Dean for Immersive Learning and Digital Innovation at Johns Hopkins University School of Nursing, where we did this amazing study that we're going to be talking about. But more recently, I've moved to Penn State, where I serve as the Associate Dean for Graduate Education and also lead the Center for Immersive Learning and Digital Innovation, which is a AHRQ-funded center. It's a patient safety learning lab where we use VR, mixed reality, robotics, AI to improve patient safety and improve the quality of care. I was able to bring all of that skills and embed them into graduate nursing education here at Penn State. But honestly, I'm partnering with Dr. Christopher Garrison, who's the director of Simulation Lab, and we're trying to incorporate all of these for our undergraduate students.
Oh, that's great.
Well.
That's so exciting to hear. So just as a little bit of a background, Vinciya and I connected years ago, and it was really as our Avtrach was in its almost prototype form, to not just say, again, if you think of the Kirkpatrick research levels, not just say, do the students like it? And, their pre-test, post-test scores were different, but also looking at the impact of stress. We all know that stress happens in simulation anecdotally, but I had done some early research at the University of Delaware when I was there on how much does it actually bump stress and how long are the students stressed after the simulation experience or the learning experience. And so we were really hoping to look at the idea of how this possibly could impact stress levels if we would compared mannequin-based learning, the wearable-based learning, and then the outcomes on patient care. So Vinciya, I would love to hear a little bit more. Obviously, you have a passion for patients with complex airway needs, as you mentioned, and I love that the Global Tracheostomy Collaborative is really kind of that whole patient-centered outcomes, focus, that you're not just hearing from clinicians and what they're gathering, but you're also hearing from that lived experience. So I think that it's very unique, but also so important. I can remember as an ER nurse, if we had a patient that had, maybe a genetic anomaly or some other thing, I would always look to the parents to help educate me on that because it was something that was unusual, and they obviously were the experts because it was their lived experience. So I love that it does that. But can you talk just a little bit about why this research and how it formed? Because it was a very loose concept, obviously, when we first connected and talked, but you really solidified this into the study.
Yes, I have been living the experience of caring for tracheostomy patients for the last several decades. I remember working as a bedside nurse in the medical ICU, where there were a lot of us who did not want to take care of tracheostomy patients because we were fearful
Me too.
About about the tracheostomy tube getting clogged. And some of us did not even enjoy the sounds of suctioning. And so when I did night shifts, I always found myself ending up with all the tracheostomy patients, which I started loving and wanting to do something to improve the comfort level of nurses. But eventually, once I became a nurse practitioner and started finding that there is a huge gap among our clinicians in terms of caring for patients with a tracheostomy, mainly because it's not that they're taught how to do it, because sometimes it's all theoretical. And it's also because we don't see that many tracheostomy patients on a regular basis. So you may be the expert at a period of time, and then if you don't see a patient for 3 months, then you kind of lose that skill. And so I think that's where we realize that apart from teaching students in academic setting, we need to continue this training into clinical practice as well. And we do have mannequins that we use for training, but it doesn't give that lifelike experience for our students. And so when I saw this vest and that you introduced me to, it was a no-brainer because it had a lot of features that did not exist in any of the other tools. One is the ability to suction secretion so that the students or the learners can really have that feedback because they can actually see the secretions come up. They can hear the sounds, familiarize themselves with that. And then if they go too far and touch the carina, it sends the vibration to the standardized patient who's wearing it to let them know that maybe they need to act a different way so that the students can learn from that. So many of our standardized patients have also enjoyed really getting into or really pretending to be that patient. And then talking to our participants, they've also said how realistic this is to have the patient respond to you and not just carry a mannequin that's laying still. So merging the two worlds of realism and inanimate object together really made sense to me. So I think training was either at the bedside historically, which was inconsistent, on mannequins, which lacked realism. I think that gap is what really intrigued me to think about other ways to make it better. So then the questions I've been asking is, could a wearable simulator literally placed on a standardized patient offer both realism and that emotional engagement and ultimately improve competency and stress resilience?
Yeah. And that's, again, I think we really want to dissect that of, you know, if people are making an investment in equipment, that they're making the best investment possible with the biggest possible outcomes, and the biggest bang for your buck, essentially, with that. And I think I will say my own personal lived experience as a student nurse was, the complete patient that I got was a patient with a tracheostomy. I hit the carina. This patient was semi-comatose, but reacted very strongly to the fact that I had hit the carina. I didn't know what to do, and it scared me. And so that was my lived experience as a nursing student. But then when I went back into education and I saw the tools that were available and the limitations that they had, it just, it kind of undoes everything, because when I would take them then into clinical, and I obviously would try to provide them with a tracheostomy patient as well, they always felt as though they were unconsciously incompetent, because they'd look at me as we walked out of the room and say, "That's nothing like it was in skills lab. You checked me off," Yes. And it's just different when you have someone looking at you, someone who's struggling to breathe, someone who's, reacting to the fact that you've hit the carina. And so, again, all of those things really, hit home with me as well. And again, we appreciate everything that you did. But can you talk a little bit more about the main research question that you had, or the hypothesis that you had going into the study?
Sure, but before I get into that, I just wanted to share an experience of a patient for whom the nurse kept saying that the patient was having bloody secretions, and we kept doing all the tests possible. And then I thought, let me go take a scope in there and see what's going on. I scoped in, and it was like a polka dot design in the airway because we've been just going in too far and suctioning against the wall of the trachea. So it's not just the carina, so it's the wall as well that we need to be thinking about. And every time we place that negative pressure, it pulls some of that mucosa as well, causing trauma for a patient. So having those sensors to sense it and help the learner to appreciate how far to go down is huge, because in real patients, they cough, they say that they're uncomfortable, but they don't get that in that mannequin. So thank you. But to answer your question about the research question itself, we really wanted to know whether a wearable simulator would outperform a high fidelity mannequin in preparing learners. So our hypothesis was that the wearable simulator group wearing that vest would not only achieve higher competency scores, but also show better physiological stress management. And we measured this by measuring their salivary cortisol levels in the sim lab setting, and also when they transitioned into real patient care as well.
Yeah. So in reading the study, you did the kind of their baseline as they were going through their teaching, the learning experience, as they were observing and going through the training experience, and then they were separated out. So the control group was the mannequin-based group, and then the experimental group was the wearable simulator with a standardized patient. And then they went to bedside.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, great.
Yes.
So as far as the research question and how you evaluated that, I think that again, with the fact that you're measuring cortisol levels, because we actually did a study where we had students kind of almost like the 1 to 10 scale for pain, but doing it with stress. And then we measured their salivary alpha amylase and their cortisol levels, and they actually weren't very well aligned. So we knew that we'd have to, in the study that we had done, we knew that we'd have to actually look at the cortisol levels of the students to make sure that we were actually getting quantitative data in that. Can you talk a little bit about the methods and what you did along the research process?
Sure. So we actually conducted a multi-institutional randomized controlled trial with about, I think it was 69 participants across Johns Hopkins Hospital and also the Durham VA Hospital. Our participants were randomized 1-to-1 to train either on the high fidelity mannequin or the Avtrach wearable simulator. And we used a validated objective structured clinical exam tool to score their suctioning competency. And we measured we collected timed salivary cortisol samples. We got a total of 10 samples per participant over 4 sessions. So it was from baseline training to real clinical demonstrations to objectively measure stress. So we had that one on day 1. We had the baseline cortisol level, and then day 2 was when we actually gave them training and helped them to ask questions and help them to practice. So even for that, we did cortisol level 15 minutes before the session, immediately after the training session, and then 15 minutes after the after the training session. And then the following session, they were either in the experimental group or the control group, and we asked them to demonstrate suctioning of the tracheostomy tube. And again, we did cortisol levels 15 minutes before, immediately after, and 15 minutes after. And we did the same thing in a clinical setting as well on real patients. again, measuring the cortisol level 15 minutes before, immediately after, and 15 minutes after. So we then analyzed all of this data to figure out if we were able to identify which technology or which approach yielded better outcomes in terms of competency and stress levels.
Great. So before we get into that portion of it, did you have any struggles or any challenges with the research design or the data collection at all?
I think the biggest challenge was the logistics, because each participant had to provide 10 cortisol samples at very specific time intervals. We also know that cortisol levels may be different in the morning versus in the afternoon. So trying to get them at the same time they came for the first testing was a big challenge, because we wanted to make sure we got them at the same time. We know that cortisol peaks 10 to 30 minutes after stress, so we were very particular about getting it immediately after and 15 minutes after the completion of the procedure. So that was one challenge. The other one was attrition was real. Of the 69 participants who enrolled, only 46 completed the full protocol. And also, since the modalities were visibly different, blinding was not possible for this randomized controlled trial. So we did use rigorous standardized assessment tools, and also accounted for all of that in our analysis to reduce bias. So those were, I think, the three main challenges. Of course, the other challenge was, because it was multi-institutional study, we had to get IRB from both, stay on top of it, and then we had to go through DUA to transfer data. So these are all real challenges. Seems like a challenge when you didn't know what you were getting into when you're planning to do multi-institutional studies, but I think once you've done it, you get better at it. So it was definitely a learning opportunity for all of us who were involved in the study.
Yeah, and again, the idea of having a multi-site study just adds more validity to the research outcomes, and the randomization, all of that is so important, so that when you're looking at this, you're looking at it as non-biased as possible.
Mm-hmm. The one other thing I also wanted to add was recruitment of participants was time consuming. We really wanted to get a good mixture of learners, anywhere from novice to experienced nurses. Trying to recruit students from the nursing programs seemed to be a little bit more easier than finding experienced nurses. Even when we say experienced nurses, they were experienced as a nurse, but were novice in providing tracheostomy care. So we definitely made sure that if anyone had done suctioning more than 3 times in a short period of time just before our study, we actually excluded them. So we were getting novices in tracheostomy suctioning, but they were expert nurses. So that was a huge challenge, because most of the nurses were not able to make the time to come into the sim lab. So trying to recruit individuals who have a busy schedule and requesting them to come during a time they were off was definitely a challenge.
Yeah, I can imagine. And sometimes once you've moved on and you're no longer in your educational aspect, they kind of don't want to be analyzed or done. Although I would have been the first one to sign up for it, because I would have loved to have had an opportunity for additional training and education based off of my undergraduate experience in my clinical. So I guess it just depends. So can you talk a bit about the key findings of the study?
Yes. In nutshell, both groups improved, but the differences were actually striking, because in the clinical setting, the mannequin-trained group had a median competency score of 30, while the wearable simulator group scored 34, and that was actually statistically significant when you compared between and within groups. The stress levels told the same story. In the clinical setting, the mannequin group's median cortisol spiked to 0.38, while the wearable group remained much lower at 0.22. So I think, in short, the group that were assigned in the experimental group using the wearable simulator seemed to perform better and manage stress better. When they were in the simulation setting, their stress levels did not vary. But when they went to the clinical setting, you could notice that those who were in the experimental group did better than those who were in the control group.
And were you able to collect any qualitative data? I know it wasn't reported in the study, but was there qualitative data from the groups stating anything? Did you do any focus groups or anything along those lines?
No, we did not do it in a structured way, but we had some anecdotal comments saying how they really enjoyed that experience of really immersing themselves into caring for a real patient because they felt it was very different compared to working with a mannequin, because everyone has worked with a mannequin, whether they were students or even if they were experienced nurses. So for them to see this, they felt like this is exactly what we need to help us feel more comfortable. So even the nurses who were experienced, experts in many things, but were novices in tracheostomy care, felt that this could be something that could be used for their annual trainings. And they kept saying, oh, we need to bring this to our annual competency-based training so that they can feel more comfortable taking care of their patients.
And I love your point that you said earlier about the fact that if they don't encounter a patient with a tracheostomy on a regular basis, that competency or that skill or even their confidence probably wanes. And the fact that if they were able to do this on a regular basis, even thinking of just-in-time training at the bedside, they're going to get a new tracheostomy patient, you can take this device in, and have them working with it, in a just-in-time kind of environment will potentially give them more competency and better outcomes for the patient in the long run as well. Vinciya, can you share your thoughts on the impact of how this research could potentially impact simulation-based education?
Yeah, I think the study highlights that fidelity matters. The wearable simulator integrated physical fidelity, the anatomy and secretions that are part of the physical component. It also had the conceptual fidelity, the realistic cues like breath sounds, and psychological fidelity, which is emotional engagement with the patient who coughs and reacts. So that combination translated into superior performance and stress adaptation. So for educators like us, it means that we can design simulation that prepares learners not only to just do the task, but to feel ready for high stakes real world care. So I think that's the impact in terms of making sure that our students are practice ready when they're ready to graduate, not just checking off a task.
Yeah. I had a new grad that actually went down to Hopkins after they graduated from the University of Delaware. And because we had the prototype, they had learned doing a simulation with the tracheostomy. And this particular student hit the carina during suctioning. And in the debriefing, it really upset him in the simulation. Like, he didn't want to hurt the patient. But in the debriefing, he was able to talk to the standardized patient and say, what could I have said or done to, basically say, I'm sorry that this happened, and restore that therapeutic relationship. And then he and his, the facilitator discussed ways that he could help to empower the patient and, encourage the patient. And he took that to his clinical practice. And within the first year, I would say the first couple of months, he was on trauma step down, and he had a patient with a tracheostomy, and the brother was there and was pretty protective of his, the brother was protecting the patient because they'd had some noxious experiences with his tracheostomy. And my former student, his name's Sammy, but he was able to really talk to not just the brother, but also to the patient to say, well, I understand why you're here, that you're able to protect him, but let's talk about ways that we can teach him to actually, indicate that he's short of breath and indicate that he wants the suctioning to be done and things along those lines. And what he said was the difference between he and his new grad peers was that he had success in that initial interaction, especially with a potentially challenging, scenario. And he built on that success for his future patients and felt more confidence to take care of patients with tracheostomies versus had a new grad without that experience encountered that, may have felt intimidated, increased stress levels, may have made a mistake or done something that, would have left more of a defensive feeling or feeling of, I'm afraid to go into the next patient and do this situation. So again, it's anecdotal, but it is something where you can see that this leads to longer term success and confidence in providing care, and kind of that, especially in that, if you think of that last bit of their transition to practice, being able to have those successes under their belt really means a lot to them, to build their confidence and have them stay in the profession.
And in terms of impact, I know you and I often focus on nursing students, but in this study, we did enroll some respiratory therapists, speech language pathologists, and physical therapists. Honestly, I did not even invite them to participate at first, but they heard about it. One of them came, trialed it, and she was in charge of this particular group. And she said, let's work with IRB, let's get them added to the study. So it was really fascinating to see that other disciplines are also interested in these simulators as well. Again, we, in the study, focused on training clinicians, but I think that this has the potential to help our, I shouldn't say colleagues, those who have a tracheostomy, whether they're in the hospital or in the community setting, and their family members and caregivers who typically don't get enough training, right? So if we can use this to help them get that real experience and get comfortable and help with their stress levels, they'll feel more comfortable, more prepared to be out there in the community taking care of their loved ones as well. And I was also thinking from broader research standpoint, I think your study, and probably this is the only other one that really measures both competency and physiological stress in this particular context. I wonder if this can be a cost-effective approach for even low resource settings as well, where they cannot purchase $100,000 mannequins to get that realism. So you combine a small device with a standardized patient to get the experience that they need. I really think that this study provides more prospective impact. I think we definitely need to do more studies to ensure that we can utilize in all of those populations and settings as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it can be used in a broader, and the fact that other disciplines were involved in this and were excited to be involved also is very heartwarming to me, because it takes a team. It takes a healthcare team. And that includes the family members and the patients themselves as well, as you have pointed out multiple times, especially in this complex airway presentation. I think it's important every single time, but in that situation, you have a very vulnerable patient that may or may not be verbal, and that's their airway. That is the primary thing that needs to be maintained in a person for life. So having them comfortable with what they're going to see and experience. And we have had, clinical settings that have asked or thought about the idea of incorporating this into patient-family teaching as far as discharge goes, because nobody wants to be especially if you're non-clinician, to suction your loved one for the first time and you're learning on them, but this gives an opportunity for things along those lines as well. Yeah. So just, in thinking about your personal perspective and, in reflecting back on this, what would you say is the most rewarding, and or if you have any more challenging things that you incorporated along the way or learned as part of conducting this research?
I think that the most rewarding part for me was seeing learners come alive during the training. When the wearable simulator, the standardized patient coughed and showed signs of discomfort, learners would often say at the end of the session, this felt so real. I was nervous, but in a way that helped me to learn. So that moment when simulation moves beyond a checklist to real emotional engagement was powerful for me. And it showed up in the data too in clinical settings. But the learners trained with wearable simulators scored higher on their competency compared to mannequin, and also their cortisol levels stayed stable instead of spiking like those who were using the traditional standardized patient. So to me, the combination of numbers and the reactions that I observed validated why we did this work. The most challenging part was sustaining a multi-site study, and we wanted to finish it in a year, but it ended up becoming a multi-year study because of the recruitment challenges. But if you recall, it's also because we were conducting this study during the COVID-19 pandemic. So it was very hard to bring folks on site to participate in the study, and the attrition that I mentioned as well. Coordinating saliva sampling, training, simulations, and real patient care across institutions wasn't easy. So overcoming all those hurdles made the results and the lessons we learned even more meaningful.
Yeah, and we thank you for all of that work, because I know it wasn't easy, and the tenacity and the fortitude to, again, continue on even post-pandemic, to continue on with that was, again, it does show you that you can do things that you don't ever think you could or possibly do, but we really do appreciate all of that work. One thing we often get asked by people that are either entering into their PhD or people that are considering PhD research opportunities is, what could we do in simulation-based education that could have meaningful outcomes and really lead to kind of those Kirkpatrick 3 or Kirkpatrick 4 levels? So I just wondered if you had any advice that we could pass along as we're asked those questions.
Well, at least from this study, what I've learned is that the study really opens the door to a range of PhD level questions. But a logical next step is to ask, do these benefits last? Because I think we measured short-term outcomes. I think the next question for a PhD student or a team of students would be, how can we measure the sustainability of what we accomplished with this one? So maybe they follow the learners for 6 months or a year later to measure skill retention and stress resilience over time. Another area is expanding beyond suctioning into emergencies like accidental dislodgement or bleeding to see if wearable simulators prepare clinicians for those high-stakes scenarios. So PhD research could also evaluate cost effectiveness and scalability in resource-limited settings, since wearable devices are far more portable than mannequins. So can we take it into those areas where they have poor access to all the resources and give them the training in those settings? I'd also encourage projects that look at interprofessional team training. So our sample included all of nurses, respiratory therapists, and speech pathologists, but we did not measure with all of them being involved in a case scenario. So it'll be good to evaluate team science. And really, it would be helpful for a doctoral student to study how immersive high-fidelity simulation affects teamwork, communication, and ultimately patient outcomes. So there's a lot of opportunity to build on the work that we've started.
Great. Those are all three really, really wonderful and impactful ideas. And we thank you so much, number one, for doing the research and putting in the hard work, plus all of the team down at the VA hospital in Durham. And we also want to wish you well in your Penn State, your new position at Penn State, and look forward to continuing to work with you as you are developing out your position and working with the director of simulation.
Thank you so much. I think it's been a pleasure working with your team, and it looks like there's definitely a lot more opportunities to collaborate. So I'm looking forward to that as well. Thank you.
All right. Well, if I've learned anything, it is that a multi-site research
randomized
study
control trial
sounds like a lot of work, and I am
if you think
not
about
cut
it,
out for that.
If you think about it, that's what drug companies do to test their products.
Yeah.
And that it was, again,
and a pandemic, I did not even consider that in all of it, but it's like in the pandemic where then they couldn't come in while everything in healthcare was going absolutely insane.
Yes.
Then having respiratory and SLP come in and they want to get involved and including that in, like, I just, oh my goodness. Like that's, I think that is what makes it so challenging just in simulation in general, because we've always done clinical, right? So there has been very little in terms of saying like, okay, let's do some cross comparisons between clinical and all these things. In simulation, we have to prove what the outcomes are, prove that, again, this is better. But it takes so much work that it's also just like, yeah, it's years and years and years to get anything back out of it to then be able to say, here's the better option. Or
it takes a lot of fortitude, but again, you can see her passion
for sure
patients and family members that are have complex airways and tracheostomies. And, I have to say, again, my personal experience as a student nurse led me to want something way better. I mean, if you look at it, the reason that they did the study with the Avtrach, or we were looking for study with that, was because we that was the first product that got out onto the market, because it was something where I saw such a big need.
Yeah. Well, that's why it was the first product on the market. And that's the thing too, is it's like when we go to trade shows and talk to so many different nurses, it is always it is a response regardless. It will be a negative response or it will be a run to it. I love it. This is the greatest thing. But it's one or the other. It is either I hate it or I love it. And if they hate it, it's because they're scared and they're not comfortable with it. And if they love it, then it's like...
had a noxious experience.
Or they're like, I've learned that I'm the... I've heard so many people be like, I was the designated tracheostomy suctioner because... Exactly, because I was passionate about it and I wanted to make sure that the patient was advocated for. Or you have the people who are like, I don't touch airway, I don't touch trach, you know what I mean? And so it's regardless, you're getting such a tracheostomies cause such a visceral reaction. And I think any provider, right, SLP, respiratory, or nursing, you're going to get a reaction in terms of, again, noxious experiences, them being super scared to go into it, whatever it was, there's going to be some sort of response to it. And I think that is what is so... like across the board, it is something, she mentioned that saying not a lot of people know about tracheostomies. And it really isn't necessarily something that I ever knew about from a non-medical background. You know what I mean? I didn't know what it was. I didn't understand when someone would get it, when they wouldn't, and all these different background pieces. But it's also kind of like once you get into it, there's so much there. And because a lot of people then go on and live with a tracheostomy, it also becomes an identity component as well, where then it's similar to like an ostomy or something like that, where there's so much there as the patient that you're just ingrained in this world, right? And it does become very consuming, I think, as a loved one or the patient with it. And I think that is why, for an SP side of it, it does become so, you get so connected because you can see how vulnerable you are as that patient, right? It's so easy to see the vulnerability. And I think it's a different vulnerability than like a catheterization, right? Because catheterization is vulnerable, but it's a very different situation because that's an in and out. It doesn't come with like an identity situation. It's vulnerable, but it's not necessarily that identity piece. I think with the tracheostomy, because it becomes so impactful, emotional, and that experience, even if it is temporary, having it does create such a vulnerability that I think, again, it just, as the patient, you feel so much more like you can connect, create such a well-rounded scenario. And again, that's such good sim, right? Because then it's like you have an SP who's excited and then the healthcare provider who wants to learn.
Yeah, but I will say, when we did the videos of patients who, didn't have tracheostomies all their lives, so they got them as adults as a result of tongue cancer. It was two patients that actually had that. One of those people that we interviewed, because we were kind of trying to say, well, what was it like? What did you expect? And, how was it different? But they said the idea that I didn't have two airways. So God gives us two airways. And when your nose is stuffed, it stinks, right?
Yeah.
Well, now imagine you only have one airway, and it's neither one of the ones you're used to.
Yeah.
And how, that was very off-putting or very difficult, and something that they hadn't considered. And I think that the idea of that is so important. And then the other comment that you made about how polarizing potentially tracheostomies are is, I wonder if the individuals that were not comfortable with it, is it because they just never got a good education? They never were exposed to this. They never got to talk to an SP that wore it. And so had they had that opportunity, could things be different?
Yeah.
I had that noxious experience as a nursing student. I wasn't the one that jumped in when it was a tracheostomy patient, that came into the ER because I was uncomfortable with it.
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily feel as though I had the skills. And so it lingered with me for a long time.
Yeah.
But it was also something that motivated me to make better when I got into the opportunity to educate people. I just remember early on when I was hired, I kept talking to the mannequin company saying, you need to be able to put mucus in there. You need to be able to do all these things. And nobody was listening. And I understand now why. Like, making changes on products is not easy.
Yeah.
But at the time, to me, I'm just like, just slip a sensor in there. We're good,
Yeah.
And things didn't change. And so I thought, I've got to take the bull by the horns and do this myself.
Yeah. And even then, I think at the end of the day, when you have that live person who can look back at you with the eyes, with the fear, with the reaction, it's very different than if you think of a mechanical mannequin just shaking or coming up off the bed, right? It's a very different situation when you think of the humanity and, like she discussed, the fidelity of the situation, but also being able to have the family member that's included in that scenario, which is very common for tracheostomy patients, that they have a loved one that is by that bedside the entire time. And again, having that is it's like, if you are the nurse who volunteers, right? Like, okay, I'll go in and take on the patient. Well, now it's not only just, okay, I have to suction this patient and do a good job, but also I have to earn the trust of the family member. I have to earn the trust of the patient. And then I have to prove myself. And I can't make an error, because if I do make that error and go down and hit the carina, I am going to cause harm. And I never even thought of suctioning the sides. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I can't, like, that is just...
Yeah. Well, that's why you don't put your finger on the suction as you're going down, and you start to swirl the tube. The reason you do all that is so that you're not pushing right up against the mucous membranes of the inside of the trachea.
Yeah.
So lots to learn and lots to know.
Yeah.
And the reasons why are so very important.
Yeah. I just think it's really exciting to see some of this research coming out in terms of what the outcomes are for students, for experienced nurses, like she discussed, and then being able to go and us actually see what that could mean for the future of simulation. And again, being able to make sure that across the board, students are more confident when they're getting to the bedside. 100%. And again, going back to that stress level, that they've had the feedback from an SP, they've had that experience to know what it's actually going to be like, and then now they're getting into the real scenario, right? And I think that that's what's really important, is actually being able to see these things translate. And that's why we do it, right? I think that if all of us in simulation weren't seeing the translation, you wouldn't have this same cult mentality around it. But because we can see how much better it is, I do think that that's what those magic moments in sim are, that get people bought in, that want to be a part of it. And I think that that's always really exciting to see. And it's exciting to finally see this finally come to fruition. And again, it's really exciting. And I really like the idea too of us being able to include this with patients and family members that do have tracheostomies, and considering what advocacy can look like for those patients, as well as for, bedside learning, discharge education, things like that.
Patient family.
With the patient's family, and then being able to practice with something like the Avtrach, again, I think makes a world of difference for what they can do.